Kayla Tausche of CNBC reporting that a senior administration official now suggesting that meeting between President Trump and President Xi Jinping is now highly unlikely to take place before the March 1st tariff deadline, as you guys have been discussing. We also just had Larry Kudlow, the National Economic Council director, in the White House driveway talking to reporters. What Larry Kudlow told reporters is there's no indication that the president will meet with Xi Jinping at the tail end of his Asia trip. Remember, we now know that the president will be in Vietnam on February 27th and 28th, and there had been some speculation that the president would go straight from Vietnam, perhaps to Beijing or some neutral site to meet with Xi Jinping. Larry Kudlow now saying within the past few minutes there's no indication of that. There's no discussion of that. Reporters pressed him on whether a meeting with Xi Jinping was off the table, and what Larry Kudlow just said is Trump has said a number of times he expects to meet with Xi on trade. Where, when is totally up in the air at the moment. Does it depend on meetings this week? It might. As Larry Kudlow said, the United States has its varsity team over in China negotiating right now, referring to Mnuchin and Lighthizer, who are going over next week. So the question is whether Trump and Xi will meet at all. And Scott, I can tell you that one scenario that I've heard floated here in Washington in the past 24 hours is this idea that you might get to March 1st. The president might have to raise tariffs on China, put those into place, and then schedule a meeting with Xi Jinping. So there are a lot of different possibilities floating right now, including a scenario in which the tariffs do go back into place, and then there's an announcement of a meeting that could take place. How would the market digest that? I think it's very unclear at this point, Scott.
You know, what's so interesting is that you have the president saying that he's going to have this second summit with North Korea's leader at the end of February, and I'm wondering if in some respects inside the White House, a meeting like that is deemed as more important than a meeting with China's president ahead of a March 1st deadline?
Sure. Well, look, I mean, there's a couple of things going on, right? I mean, so from a strategy and media perspective, one of the things that the White House will want to consider is how to separate those two events. If they assume that both of those events are going to be a positive headline for the White House, they're going to want to give them both room to breathe, right? So you're going to want to have the Vietnam meeting with the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, have the headline bounce out of that, and then you'll want a separate meeting in China and have a headline bounce out of that, if you assume that those are both going to be positive for the White House. So what we can tell you is that we're going to Vietnam on February 27th and 28th. I've spent some of the morning filling out paperwork to get a visa to get into Vietnam for that trip. So, you know, the president is going. Where he goes after that is unclear, and Larry Kudlow suggesting that there's no indication that he's going to China or going to meet with Xi Jinping. Doing that requires an enormous amount of advanced logistical work, right? Teams would have to be in Beijing or in the neutral site, if not now, then very soon, to do the advanced preparations, security, logistics, all that. No indication that any of that is happening right now. So could we get to March 1st without a deal? It looks like that's an increasingly likely possibility. The question is, what does that mean? Does the United States slap the tariffs back into place? And does the United States announce on March 1st that there's some agreed upon date for a meeting between Trump and Xi in March, perhaps?
Unless you go back-to-back in Vietnam. You have one in the waiting room and one right there in the center stage.
You could do that. You could do that. The question is, you know, there's a lot of turf stuff here, right? Yeah. Who meets with who? Is it a neutral site? Is it on their turf? Is it on our turf? A lot of that diplomatic nicety surrounds that. I think the United States might be a little bit wary of the idea of the president going to Beijing and then offering concessions of any kind to the Chinese. The optics of that are not good. So if you're going to be offering concessions on both sides, you might want to do it in a neutral place where no one feels that they're giving something up on the other guy's turf.